My name is Susanna Zamet, and today I will be presenting a presentation on the differences between the United States Department of Agriculture versus the Food and Drug Administration, which is within the Department of Health and Human Services. I'll mainly be concentrating on the differences and similarities based on their definitions, the history, their authority in terms of what foods they regulate, as well as what acts made those decisions, and what their organizational structure is. And then also I pulled one challenge between both of them that they're each encountering at the moment, which is slightly related, to see how they're handling it differently. Before outlining the major differences between these two agencies, I'll begin by providing basic definitions. The United States Department of Agriculture, commonly referred to as the USDA, is a federal department made up of agencies and offices with the goal of helping American farmers and ensuring food safety for American consumers. In contrast, the United States Food and Drug Administration, also known as the FDA, is located within the Department of Health and Human Services and has taken on the task of protecting Americans from harmful drugs and foods through reviews and inspections. The USDA and FDA have associated origins. On May 15th, in 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed an act of Congress into law creating the USDA. When incidences of diseased imported livestock kept reoccurring, Congress passed an act in 1865 to quarantine imported animals, assigning regulation duties to the Treasury Department. The public was not satisfied with the poor enforcement practices that resulted. 19 years later, Congress constructed the Bureau of Animal Industry, BAI, within the USDA. Its purpose was to prevent the use of infected animals in food and food products. Although the BAI was dissipated in the 1950s by President Dwight Eisenhower, its function was retained by newer agencies within the department. I will discuss this and other food-related agencies within the USDA in more detail in the upcoming slides. The FDA originally began as a division of the USDA. The frequency of food adulteration sharply increased in the late 19th century. With the rising public awareness of this issue, Theodore Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 into law. The Bureau of Chemistry was tasked with enforcing the law. In 1927, the Bureau reorganized, and Congress created the Food, Drug, and Insecticide Administration. Shortly thereafter, in 1930, some responsibilities were shifted, and it became what we still refer to today as the Food and Drug Administration. In 1940, the FDA moved from the USDA to the Federal Security Agency. In 1953, it transferred to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And finally, in 1988, it was established as an agency of the Department of Health and Human Services. USDA agencies cover a variety of topics, including nutrition, inspection, natural resources, rural development, marketing, and research. In regards to the food industry, the USDA has authority over 15% of the food supply. This includes livestock, such as cattle, sheep, swine, and goats, domesticated poultry, meat and poultry products. This pertains to 3% or less of raw meat or poultry, and meat and poultry products with 2% or less of cooked poultry. Items that fall into this category include pork and beans, or broth and stock, egg products, including whole eggs, yolks, whites, eggs broken from shells, and processed eggs, catfish, and open-faced sandwiches. The current jurisdiction of the USDA is based off of several acts. In 1906, the Meat Inspection Act was passed and gave the BAI authority to inspect livestock that's previously mentioned in this presentation. In 1957, the Poultry Products Inspection Act allowed the USDA to provide federal oversight of the poultry industry. The Wholesome Meat Act of 1967 amended laws to require states to conduct more inspections. If they could not abide, the federal government would step in. In 1970, the Egg Products Inspection Act gave the USDA the power to regulate all egg products, not including shelled eggs, that was kept by the FDA authority. In 2007, the Farm Bill made catfish regulation the responsibility of the USDA as well. The USDA is comprised of a large number of agencies and offices. Those relevant to the food industry include the Agricultural Market Service, the AMS, controls organic certification and labeling, grade standards of produce, meat, and eggs, and the child nutrition qualifications for certified products. The Agricultural Research Service, ARS, the Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion, CNPP. This agency is in charge of MyPlate, formerly known as MyPyramid, and establishes the dietary guidelines based on scientific research studies every 10 years. The Farm Service Agency, FSA, which implements agricultural policy and aids farmers in need. The Food and Nutrition Service, FNS, that provides children and low-income persons access to food. The Food Safety and Inspection Service, FSIS, which is in charge of the regulation of foods listed under the USDA's jurisdiction to make sure they are wholesome and correctly labeled. And lastly, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, NIFA. Since the FDA is located in the Department of Health and Human Services, its focus is centered on public health. In addition, it has jurisdiction over 85% of the food supply. This is comprised of fruits, vegetables, shelled eggs, dairy products, grains, all fish excluding catfish, game meat, closed sandwiches, infant formula, and dietary supplements. While the USDA is made up of several agencies and offices, you'll notice that the FDA has only one subdivision, and yet has a multitude of acts that have over the years shaped its jurisdiction compared to the few of the USDA. Beginning in 1937, 107 people died from taking an elixir. This resulted in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. The law required the FDA to start regulating cosmetics and medical devices, required testing to establish all new drugs were safe prior to public release, established food standards, and prohibited poisonous additives in food. The first food standards to be issued were for canned tomato products. In 1954, the Miller Pesticide Amendment required pre-market approval of pesticide residues in or on food. The Food Additives Amendment of 1958 required manufacturers to establish safety of food additives. At this time, the FDA published the first list of substances generally recognized as safe, also known as GRAS. The Delaney Clause was added that prohibits the use of cancer-causing substances in food. In 1960, the Color Additive Amendments required pre-market approval of color additives. In 1980, Infant Formula Act established special FDA control to ensure necessary nutritional content and safety of formula. In 1990, the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act required all packaged foods to bear nutrition labeling and all health claims on those packages to be substantiated. In 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act also required labeling on dietary supplements and classified them as food to be regulated by the FDA. The Food Safety Modernization Act in 2011 requires the FDA to regulate the way foods are grown, harvested, and processed. The FDA is given the authority for mandatory recalls. Most recently, in 2016, the FDA issued its own label reform standards, which are to be enforced in 2018. As I mentioned before, the FDA is organized into 4 different offices to oversee medical products and tobacco, operations, global regulatory operations, and foods. The only center pertaining to the food industry is the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition that works to carry out the mission of the FDA. Although the USDA and FDA have different subdivisions and regulate separate foods, the challenges and controversies they encounter are similar. On July 29, 2016, President Obama signed the GMO labeling bill. The bill requires the USDA to develop nationwide labeling requirements for genetically modified organisms within the next 2 years. Before a solution can be suggested, the USDA is tasked with identifying the threshold of GMO ingredients that would require labeling and the language on the packaging and/or symbol to convey it. They've been granted 1 year to determine whether electronic labeling and online labels, or QR codes, provide enough access to required information. Furthermore, they have to audit companies that fail to comply with the bill, but cannot fine these companies for infractions or pull unlabeled products off shelves. No matter the outcome, those who support or oppose the bill will critique the USDA solution as being too strict or too weak. For example, the FDA has already criticized the bill because it leaves space to exempt ingredients such as GMO soybean oil and GMO beet sugar. Similarly, the FDA has the challenge of enforcing its own label reform regulations within the next 2 years. On May 20, 2016, the FDA issued new rules for the Nutrition Facts Panel on labeled packaged products. Some changes being instated with label reform are the overall formatting change of the Nutrition Facts Panel, the mandatory labeling of vitamin D, potassium, added sugars, and the percent daily value of added sugars, changes in the reference amounts customarily consumed of certain food products that would impact the serving size, dual column labeling of packaged foods that could be eaten in one sitting, the ingredients that qualify as dietary fiber, and more. The official compliance date for manufacturers who earn more than $10 million in annual food sales is July 26, 2018. The FDA is challenged with enforcing its new regulations and record-keeping demands to the food industry that is tasked with converting all of its packaging in the allotted time. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation today.